online to turn, unless they're actually wanting to speak. Just for information, of council officers in attendance, Lisa Fillery, the Director of Resources, and Janet Dart, Policy and Engagement Officer. We've also got some guests tonight. Councillor Richard Palmer's to give a presentation later on parking. Councillor Mark Tucker, who's the Vice Chair of Sheppey Area Committee, is online. And we've got two external guests. Matthew Arnold from Stagecoach, okay, and Roland Edlington,
yeah, that's right,
from Chalkboard Buses. Also, Councillor Mike Dendor from KCC, as a member for Sittingbourne North. If anybody wishes to ask a question or have a comment, I ask you to raise your hand, just to indicate that you want to speak, and I'll call you in as necessary. And also with people online, if they can do the same with the teams. Just go through some housekeeping. Emergency evacuation procedure. There is no scheduled alarm tonight, so if the alarm does go off, then we need to leave the building as quickly as possible. The way out is through this door, down some stairs, and at the end of the stairs is the door to the outside, and just meet up on the outside of the building. Is there an agenda item 2? Apologies?
We have apologies from Councillor Derek Carnell.
Any declarations of interest? Item 4, minutes of the last meeting held on the 20th of June 2023, minutes 108 to 118 as a true record. Agenda item 5 on the bus services. What we're going to do here is going to be a presentation by the two representatives from Stagecoach and Chalkwell. I understand that Mike Tucker wants to outline the issues that he's got in CNS, and then Mr. Davidson wants to also talk about the issues in Sittingbourne. So, who wants to go first?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. I'm Matthew Arnold. I'm the Commercial Director for Stagecoach South East. We run about 350 buses across South and East Kent and East Sussex, based in Canterbury, and our principal involvement in Sittingbourne, in fact our only involvement in Sittingbourne, is Service X3, which runs between Canterbury, Faversham, Sittingbourne and Maidstone. Not going to give you a flashy presentation. I just want to give you a few bullet points really to explain where the bus industry is at the moment, because in common with a lot of other industries, we've come through a tumultuous 20 years and we're not quite out the other side yet. Roland will no doubt speak from a more local perspective, but just some headlines really. In the past 3 years since the COVID pandemic, passenger numbers have only recovered now to about 80% of what they were pre-COVID. And within that 80%, there's only about 65% of the elderly travelling on the concessionary passes. So a real big downturn in patronage. That has to be seen in context of the cost of living increases that you've all experienced. Our costs have gone up by something around 23% in the last year. So we've got a perfect storm of 20% less people travelling and a 23% hike in operating costs. So some really difficult decisions having to be made around local bus services around the county of Kent. You may have seen that this weekend we've closed our Folkestone depot. That's been a bus depot for 107 years, and it simply wasn't viable to keep that open anymore. And across the county and across the country, even large numbers of communities have lost their bus services altogether. So with that in mind, Sittingbourne is actually in quite a good place at the moment for bus services. Certainly, we've seen some growth on X3 over the past few months. We're looking at how we might make some adjustments and some improvements. Certainly, it's been affected by ongoing roadworks, particularly junction 5 works at Stockbury, but also several major sets of works along the route in Faversham over the past few weeks, now in Tenham. The general upturn in traffic, again since the pandemic, which sees about 110% of car-based traffic on the road compared with 2019. So kind of not really intended to be a bit of a doom and gloom update, but just to explain where we are. And once Roland's given this update, I think we're both happy to take any specific questions.
Okay.
One of the councillors, Councillor Weekly's representative of Regis Ward. One of the issues I get brought up with me, and it's not just Mr. Davis, from other residents come on to me from time to time, is why we have not got no Sunday bus services. I mean, the shops are open between 10 and 4, the trading law. So, you know, I'm just asking the question, is there a chance that we could have a Sunday bus service? Say weekends in Milton, or whatever number route you use during the week to for the service on the Sunday.
If you want to take, and then we'll.
Yeah, so I'm going to say that both the visitors talk, and then we'll go around to see if there's any questions after.
Sure. I do my bit, and I'll try and answer that question within my sort of my ramble here. So my name's Roland Eglinton. I am the managing director of Jobwell in Sittingbourne. We're a third generation family business based in Sittingbourne since 1931. We employ 105 people locally. So we're locally based, locally owned. And Kent as a whole is in a fairly good position in terms of it is as a mix of multinational big bus operators like Stagecoach and Aviva, and a plethora of smaller independents who are much similar to ourselves, locally owned or family businesses. And it's part of kind of the tapestry of what makes up the operating fraternity in Kent. And there's some things that the big companies do really well, and there's some things that the smaller companies do well, and they kind of complement each other in a way. Buses in Kent, I think, are 97% provided by the commercial sector, so provided by operators such as ourselves at our own commercial risk. With Kent County Council, up until recently, bridging the gap with socially necessary buses where they perceive that there's a need. I think that's 97%. Yeah. It's been a funny old couple of years for buses, particularly in Swale, because many of you will be aware, in 3 stages, Aviva were quite predominant locally. They have withdrawn from routes that they thought were not commercially viable. They've retrenched back into the bigger metropolises of Maidstone and the Medway towns. And we have stepped in and taken over those services with a degree of support from central government and local government. We work quite closely with Kent County Council, tapping into some of the funding that's been used to support bus services since the pandemic. Now, as we speak today, there isn't any Aviva buses left in Sittingbourne. So you've got ourselves doing what we call the local stuff in and around the town and into Medway, and then onto the island, and then you've got Stagecoach doing the main road stuff from Canterbury into Sittingbourne and then onto Maidstone. Back in February, or prior to February, there was a consultation that Kent County Council ran to withdraw funding from local buses, and they went ahead and did that and cut the budget by about 25%. And I think just about every Sunday service went as part of that. They're not viable in their own right. I don't doubt that there isn't a social need, but somebody's got to pay for it. Whether that's enough people using the buses on Sunday, which we've operated buses on Sundays before, and I can tell you there isn't, and it places the rest of the service in jeopardy because it becomes a drain. Not so much in bigger places like Canterbury or Maidstone, where they've got the size and they've got the density where they can put those things on. But in towns like Sittingbourne and other medium-sized or semi-rural towns around the county, they have lost a lot of their bus services. And I will say the axe fell particularly hard on Swale when it came to the KCC cuts back in February. Completely understand, and I'm not going to beat Mark up about this, but council has failed its budget, and they went out to public consultation, and that's the process that they went through. And things move on, and life goes on. We are working with Kent in some places to try and put back in a form of service, but that's far from guaranteed, and it's too early to talk details on any of that. So really that's where we are, and a little bit about what's going on in Swale over the last couple of years. So I'm happy to take questions. I'm sure Matthew's as well.
Anybody got any questions at the moment?
Hello.
Councillor.
Hiya. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Fine, thank you.
Yeah, one of the things I've found in my limited use of Sittingbourne buses is they don't really go to many places, and what I think would be really useful is if you could have something like a circle line for Sittingbourne. So you have, you know how in London you've got your circle line underground, and basically you can get on and you know you are going to end up, if you sit on it long enough, you will end up at all the stops. You can go round either way. It seems that everything just sort of, you have to stop at the bus stop by Sittingbourne railway station, then you have to get off, then you have to hang around, then you have to stand in the rain, and then the connecting service probably only goes along a main road. They don't seem to really go through the residential areas. They don't really go to where a lot of people would actually be able to use a bus service for their regular thing. And I did float this idea a while back, that wouldn't it be good if you could have something that sort of, yes, it goes through the station, but also just goes around all the other parts of Sittingbourne, picks up people in their residential estates, goes through the Eurolink if someone needs to go to work there. You've got the Merston hub that I think children's services have been moved to, but if you actually look on the map, is a long old way from anyone trying to walk there with young children. But you could have a circle line route going right past that, then going across perhaps Swale Way, then going through. My thought is there's a lot of people who want to use a bus and don't mind if it takes a bit longer, don't mind if it literally goes around the houses, just as long as it's actually sort of close to them at all. Not trying to stereotype, but a lot of retired people don't really mind if it takes a few minutes longer because it goes on a longer route, just as long as it gets there. I just think obviously we're trying to come up with commercially viable routes. I think the more things that you can connect, the more places that people might want to go to on a single circular route, the more likely that is to bring in customers. So I throw that out to you as an idea, both the bus executives and the councillors, as something maybe to consider for the future. Thank you.
Can I just follow that up? Have you looked at whether Chalkwell looked at whether there is a possibility of circular routes?
Okay. Two main challenges with that. Maybe. Firstly, you need a road network that supports it to join up the areas, and I'm not convinced we've got that. There's a number of pinch points. Our biggest competitor is not another bus company, it's the private car. And the issue with circular routes, and I've been in environments where they have circular routes and you need particular circumstances for them to work. If you give people a long round the houses journey to where they've got to go, well, I can get there in 10 minutes in the car. Why do I need to be on the bus for half an hour? Another issue with that is, in order for circular routes to work properly, you need them in both directions. Otherwise, you're taking somebody around the sun to meet the moon. You've got to take them back the opposite way. So they end up being very resource heavy and costing a lot of money to put on, or I suspect very limited gain. They need particular circumstances like major urban conurbations to work properly.
Okay, thank you for that.
Could I just come back very briefly and say that, although cars are a competitor if you've got a car, substantial chunks of the population don't have a car, especially those with, many people with small children who want to get to further places. I'm sort of, yes, a car's a competitor if you've got one, but I would have thought that this is weighted towards people who don't.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Gareth, could you turn your microphone off when you're not speaking, because we're getting feedback?
Sorry about that. It should be off now.
Thank you.
Councillor.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas Mark. Couple of things. One, it affects you, I think, Roland, slightly. So I'll start with that.
Only slightly, that's all right.
Slightly, yeah. It's to do with the school bus runs. I represent the ward that encompasses Westlands School, and I get a lot of complaints, not necessarily about your company in particular, but the other company that close to school runs as well, turning up too early and parking on the bus stops for over an hour sometimes, waiting to pick the children up, especially in the afternoons. It's not such a problem. Well, it is a problem in Adelaide Drive after Westlands kick the coaches out of their parking space where they used to be. But also one of the problems, and it's a traffic issue. The buses wait Bell Road to pick up there. A lot of which actually parked on double yellow lines and adjacent to traffic islands and that sort of thing. Also in the winter months, which we're coming into, when the buses do turn up early, they sit there with their engines running. Now I don't know whether your buses are fitted with like a night heater system or some sort of internal heating system that can run without the engines being running. That's the point on that. And the second point is actually the main bus services. I don't know what the numbers are. I think one of them's the number 9. Used to come down Homewood Avenue into Upton Lane and down Park Road. I've had residents asking why that service was stopped. It's one of my residents, represented by Councillor Chisholm now, spoken to us. If he wants to catch a bus now, he has to walk right down Upton Lane to the bus stop adjacent to the Aid at the back house. Then when he's got his bags full of shopping, he's got to walk all the way back up Upton Lane, near enough to Homewood Avenue, to go into his house. So he was asking, even if it's only, once or twice a week, I think it's number 9. But one that comes, there used to be another one that came down Park Road, I think after it been onto the Northern Driver's Station. But that one's been done away with completely from what I understand.
That was the 9 as well.
That was the 9, yeah. So, yeah, but he was asking if in some shape or form, even if it's only 1 day a week, the number 9 could be reinstated.
Right, I'll kind of tackle that in reverse order. So the 9 was one of those services that was provided by Kent County Council. They withdrew the funding in February. So that's why that stopped. And there isn't enough. I mean, we looked closely at it. There weren't enough people there to make it viable, unfortunately. But it's one of those instances where there is a social need,
Yes.
but there isn't a viable service that we can provide. So it really sort of, nobody wins out of that, I'm afraid. School buses on the A2 Bell Road, Adelaide Drive is a perennial problem. Quite right, Westlands kick the buses out for their own reasons. And there is not enough road space for the number of buses at a particular time, and particularly when schools coming out. And this question has been, it's gone round and round and round for a number of, probably good 15 years now. Nobody's got the answer. Nobody wants to provide infrastructure, space, or anything like that. I'd say ours don't tend to hang around very long because they're busy during the day providing services. And if I was allowed to strap our drivers around the head for leaving the engines running too long, I would happily do it because sometimes it's the only way to get through to them. But allowed to do that. A lot of ours will turn themselves off after 5 or 10 minutes.
So you've got the automatic stop start on them.
Yeah. Not all of them, but that is something we do try and drum into the drivers. But in terms of the road space issues, there isn't enough, and the schools are expanding, getting more buildings, bigger intakes and whatever, and it's just exacerbating the problem.
Councillor Dendor.
Thank you. Yeah, just the Western, which got right. The reason they kicked buses out was to take more pupils.
Yeah.
They had to expand to take more pupils.
So actually it wasn't like it was to extend their car park for more teachers.
So, yeah, which obviously was for more pupils. So it was a balance of what they were trying to do. A bit broader, couple of questions. One is when the subsidies, and there were subsidies occurred, and now the BSIP, or service improvement funding, is starting to come through. How are you thinking on using that? Are you able to take advantage of any of that? Okay. I'll let you answer that one first.
Okay, BSIP, Bus Service Improvement Partnership. Get the terminology right. I'll let Matthew speak in a minute as well, because we both sit on the board for the Kent BSIP. There's 5 bus operators, and so we're part of a working group with ACC and other stakeholders on how this money, and this is a fund supplied by central government as part of their national bus strategy. Kent had to put an application for funding to improve buses in Kent, and were successful in not the entirety of what they put in for, but they got a fraction of that. And in theory, that money can be used to improve buses in Kent. There are restrictions placed on it by Department for Transport as to how it can be spent. And it's a big number, or big-ish number, and it looks like a big number. But then when you drill down into it and how it can be spent, hands are tied, because it's quite heavy on infrastructure. So stuff to support bus services like bus lanes and bus hubs and tunnels and special lanes and junction improvements, things like that, and not very much for actually providing buses to use them. And some of it is being used to keep the cost of the Kent Travel Saver, which is the bus pass that young people use to get to and from school, to keep that down. In other counties, you might pay £1,500 a year. Kent residents pay £450 per child. So some of that funding is being used to support Kent residents, part of the cost of living crisis, and all of that we can understand. So in terms of providing additional services, there's limited scope as to what can be done there, and we're still working that with Ben as part of this working party of how, and we had a meeting this afternoon as to how it can be spent and what it can be spent on.
Yeah, in fact, when the original piece of guidance came out, local authorities were prohibited from using any of the money services that had either been withdrawn through lack of continuity funding, or which operators found that they could not run sustainably anymore. There's a bit of a window of hope that some of that money can now be used for that purpose, but it's a very small amount of money, and Kent's a very big county. So if there was a fund fight, then Swale would be pitched against Tunbridge and Malling, where they've had quite significant cuts. Dover, Ashford, Folkestone have all seen big cuts. So there's a little glimmer of hope, but there's going to be a mighty fight for what's actually a very, very
My second question was, it was tried here of a on-demand service, which was withdrawn eventually. It was being subsidised by Kent Science Park, as I understand. It's really just a general question. Do you think on-demand services could work in certain circumstances? And if so, what are those circumstances?
So we have started operating an on-demand service around the village of Aylsham, which can catch me in Dover. That is underwritten by developer funding from 150 houses, which have increased the size of the village substantially. I'll start by saying that no demand responsive service anywhere in the country has ever lost its place. They cannot survive without some sort of support funding. So that's kind of the baseline where we are. The most successful service was a service in Oxford called Pick Me Up, and they had some pretty loadings. They were still nowhere near.
Yeah, the developers usually, I think, 3 years worth of subsidies, and then they cut it, and it's got to be viable.
Yeah, it depends. So broadly, the highways people will generally ask us what we think about new developments, and we try and get funding for as long as we can, because obviously you're starting a new service, you want as much pump priming money as you can, because very often you'll have to start providing a bus service when the 10th house may be occupied. Well, you've only got 10 households there to try and support a bus service. And when you've got 200 or 300 homes being built, actually you need the money right up until the 300th house is occupied. So there's a bit of a disconnect there, but we're working through that. There are some legacy schemes which we can't influence, but generally there are very sensible conversations about how much money it's going to cost to underwrite a bus service to get it going, and over what time period you need. But then you'll find that the developer will say, well, we're going to, for 300 houses, we're going to build 50 in year one. So it's a bit of a moving feast, and it's not ideal, but we're working very closely with
May I ask Councillor Tucker if he has any comments he wants to make?
Yes, thank you, Chair. A couple of questions have already been answered by the gents. Thank you for that. The rest of it is really just a fact-finding mission, ready to take to the Sheppey Area Committee at the end of the month. So I'm happy with the two questions I had have already been answered, and I'll listen intently. Thank you, Chair.
No problem, thank you. Mr Davison, did you like to say anything?
Yes, I'm Jackie Davidson. I'm doing a lot of work, research work. We've got a big area of contracts. Now, forget today, I know exactly what we're on. It was a complete disaster. but that's, and people having, one thing that annoys me, first of all, is the passengers having to go at the driver. Well, they should be driving, not sitting on. They couldn't get through to them. The service having to go at them, saying they've legally got to have a break. And we lost a lot. I mean, I finished having to wait, as it turned out, 45 minutes for a bus. But anyhow, what the questions I've got mainly, how much, when a passenger shows a bus pass of any description, how much do the companies get from a bus pass, for each bus pass?
For the elderly,
Not any elderly, yeah.
Yeah, so there is an extremely complicated formula for working that out, which I mean, I don't understand. It's my responsibility. It was designed by Leeds University about 15 years ago. Nobody understands it, but everyone agrees it's not fit for purpose. And the law says that we are required to be no better or no worse off than if the scheme doesn't exist. Roughly translated, that means not make a profit.
Yeah.
So we are carrying concessionary pass holders at cost price, but we don't determine what cost price is. It's like the government saying to Tesco, you have to sell a pint of milk to any concessionary pass holder, and we're going to pay you 19p per pint without actually understanding what what's used that. So that is going to change. So next year, we've been promised from April 4, it's going to be a more realistic formula.
Oh, to my mind, if the government say your bus companies tell a maximum £2 per fare, then as far as I'm concerned, you should get £2 per bus pass.
Do you know what? If we got £2 per bus pass, I'll probably be in Barbados.
We don't want that, we need to hear. Right, next,
Can I just pick up on that? A couple more points. I mean, we have to be a little bit careful discussing numbers because we're in a competitive environment, and there's laws around that. But broadly speaking, an independent bus operator such as ourselves, we get about 47% of the equivalent fare. So that's all we get from government.
Yeah.
And then you get services having to be withdrawn because there isn't enough money going into them. People with a concessionary pass and no bus to use it on, and then they say, well, we'll quite happily pay you extra if we can have our bus back, and legally we're not allowed to take their money. So the whole thing has been out for consultation, again, government reviewing it, and we'll wait to see what the outcome of that is.
there are some more, sorry, I've got my glasses, I'm going to pass it. What I've noticed in my survey work is that, as you say, some routes are really busy. Now the X3's beginning to get a major problem on it, as you probably know. And I try and count the people getting on. When you got so many people on, I'm not saying it's accurate, but I think it's somewhere in the right region. But the most divide between, I get on Crowes Lane normally and got Foresham, and the most I've seen on that is 128. In fact, with one bus, with two of us were on it, in fact, and there was actually 98, 104 on the bus, which they shouldn't be because of that. And the driver's going, I mean, I've seen people, but people having to be told they can't get on the bus because there's actually no room.
Yeah. So,
and that's a tenner. There's a big problem now.
So I can answer that. So there's with X3 at the moment. First, it's punctuality, because we're faced with particularly the works in Tenham at the moment. We had the works in Faversham a few weeks previously, and we have weekly occurrences of either the A2 or the M2 being closed somewhere. And then we have to get through Junction 5 at Stockbury, and we have to deal with Maidstone traffic. So there's a punctuality issue, which we know about, and we're looking at how we're going to resolve that. The second thing is that Arriva's 334 was withdrawn at very short notice
Yeah,
at the beginning of the summer, and we discussed very closely with KCC what the impact of that was likely to be, and we resolved that we would wait until the end of the summer, where we are now, in order to understand what goes on when the schools go back. Because the 334 came off at the end of the last school year, and we've got no data to work on. But yeah, absolutely, we're working on that.
yeah, I thought, but we'll just continue on that. The biggest problem now is the roadworks at Mercy. That caused complete chaos. I was in the hub and there were 7 charcoal buses sitting there at 1 o'clock. And then why don't they get, and this is where I had a big argument, the service having an argument with all the passengers about they can't legally drive because they've gone past the hours. And it's difficult. So I mean, I've got complete sympathy with that. I did notice that one of your buses was running 45 minutes late. And I went to say to people, said, by the way, your bus, because I've got a stage tracker, but I haven't got a charcoal one but anyway, and I said, the bus is the one 1335 out of Sittingbourne to Maidstone. I said, it's currently running 45 minutes late. It hasn't even reached Renly Corner yet. What the hell's going on? I know what's going on. By the time they're driven from Maidstone, some Canterbury to Maidstone, they're so late, they've got to have a half-hour break. They'll come back again because they've done to, I don't know what the limit is, about 4 hours before they have to have a decent break, isn't it?
It's 5.5 hours.
5.5.
5.5. The issues around, forget everything we said about the pandemic.
Yeah.
If you ignore that for the minute, the biggest problem we have as bus operators is having access to the highway.
Yeah.
My boss, IMD, had a bit of a public spat with KCC about this earlier in the year. We had what we commonly refer to as Black Wednesday in Canterbury, where on our triangle route that runs from Canterbury to Whitstable, Herne Bay, back to Canterbury, there were 11 separate sets of roadworks, including full closures of Whitstable High Street and Herne Bay High Street.
Yeah.
And then a pop-up set of roadworks in Canterbury at the St Stephen's roundabout to repair a power connection to one house and paralysed Canterbury. It took buses 90 minutes to get from Canterbury bus station to London Road Station and back. That's a round trip of about 2 miles. And we said enough is enough. You know, people are having a pop at us for buses that are running late. It's not our fault. But we have to accept responsibility for our bus running late.
Yeah.
An interesting statistic that came out was that between compared with 2017, the number of road closures, that's just closures, that's not roadworks or street work, road closures, the number of them has increased across the county by over 200% in the last 6 years. That's not sustainable. Now, I'm not having a pop at KCC because there's development going on. Those development needs to be plumbed into sewage and water, gas, electricity, cable TV, but something has to give somewhere. So all we can do is put more and more time into timetables, which means we have to use more and more buses, and the average operating cost of a double deck that we use on the X3 is about £160,000 a year.
Yeah.
So we have to put another bus on. We've got to find £160,000, which isn't going to come from revenue.
Yeah, the other problem you've got is you haven't got enough drivers, as far as I know.
That again, that's a national issue, which actually is showing signs of starting to be resolved now.
I know you've been doing a lot of work trying to get drivers to come in drive, but I don't know what the percentage, but apparently quite a lot after they've been on the road for about a month, decide they don't like doing it.
It's a hard job.
I mean, and you think, hang on a minute, it's cost you a lot of money to train them, and yet they just walk away. I'm sure there's something you can look at to do something. I've got some ideas whether legal or not. It's not. And yeah, I've got more questions, but I'll chat with you both you afterwards. Give us some ideas. Okay, thank you.
Has anybody else got any questions they wish to ask? Just for information, there is a planning and transport policy working group to be set up this month within Swale Borough Council. Their first meeting is not to the 19th, and one of their points of reference is to look at a local focus group for buses. So we are looking to do something within Swale to look at this much more than what we're doing, because we recognise that it is quite an issue, certainly with the island in Sittingbourne. So there are things afoot and to be done. So
I think that's probably the right forum for fleshing out some of these issues. If we're talking about the same thing, it's to do with that funding that we were discussing earlier. So, I mean, there's probably not a lot we can put to rights tonight, but can be brought out as part of that appropriate process and in that environment.
And I must admit, I will try and get some input into that committee, that working party, to forward the views of here for a committee as it covers the whole of Sittingbourne.
And that's the forum, as Roland said, for lobbying to get funding to be converted into Swale, because there are 12 districts that are all vying for the same lot of money. So these local focus groups are really, really critical.
Thank you for that. We can move on to the next item. You're welcome to stay, but if you've got other,
Sorry, what?
you're welcome to stay if you
That's in
want.
the
But that's the end
agenda,
of the buses.
I'm sure it's going to be riveting. But if you don't mind, I'll make my exit at that point, because I'm happy to pick this up another time. And there was a gentleman mentioned about the Sheppey area committee or whatever. Wanted to talk about buses, and I'm happy to go to that as well. If you could pass on.
We'll pass that information on to Mark. No problem.
All right. Thank you very much for having me. No.
I've got some ideas, right? Some of them, I'm trying to complete.
Shall we step outside? Thank you, everyone.
Cheers, thank you. So if we move on to the next item, which is the parking policy that Councillor Palmer will introduce and discuss.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't realise. Okay. This is just to introduce a formal sort of parking policy. So basic introduction. Believe it or not, at the moment, Swale Council doesn't have a formal parking policy. This is something that the community committee would like to develop, and the community committee have agreed to set up a parking policy members working group. That they've had a couple of meetings, and we want to see back that what occurred there to yourself. The membership of the working group has been drawn up from the community committee, and one representative from each political group and a chair. The working group have met twice to discuss the main themes. It's all right, I can't see there's something.
Unless you could suggest they know.
The working group have met twice to discuss the main themes that should be included in the scope. So I thought I'd go through that and we'll have a discussion, of what, because the idea is for you, members of the public, to feed into this. So we won't have all the answers, but we hope as many people as who can feed into it, we may figure it up with a good policy fit for the future. So, parking policy working group have proposed the themes of the draft. Basically, to review our existing tariffs, and we're comparing that as well to around here.
You mean permits, Richard?
Sorry?
You mean permits?
No.
You see
Tariff, parking. What
Oh,
you pay,
in the car park.
you go into the car park and pay, etc., etc.
My apologies.
No, that's all right, no problem. Consider differential town and out of town parking charges. Should we charge more in town and less in the rural areas? Or are there certain car parks that are well used and others that aren't, where it might not be appropriate to charge? They're all considerations. There's nothing written down in tablets of stone. What I'm saying is we want to get your input and consider things in the mix. Consider if we should be charging in all car parks. Are there any car parks that we perhaps shouldn't charge in? Or are the car parks we aren't currently charging in that should be charged? You know, a lot of people talk about free parking. Well, someone pays for it somehow, because even a free car park will need repairs, will need lines. It's money. So, you know, should certain car parks in certain areas be free? Is there should they not be? And should there be an equality across the board? Review of evening parking. No doubt you've all probably had emails and that, and we can always review what we've done and your feed into that, and people from the public and organisations and local businesses would be welcome. So we can look at a review. You have to consider. But it's interesting with the book bus talk. We could all say we want loads and loads of buses to be able to pay for it. It's the same with council services. If the council doesn't get sufficient funding in, then certain services that it's providing, it won't be able to provide. And that doesn't matter whether it's Rail Council, whether it's KCC, or if you've heard the news today, City Council, because they're now facing some drastic problems. Consider if we should be charging for motorcycle parking. So that's one thing that was thrown into the mix. I think it's quite awkward to put a ticket, to buy a ticket from the machine, put it on a motorbike, but there are apps, so they could pay by Ringo. So that is another question. Should they have free parking or should they be charged? Yeah, you know, the evening, you know, there's always the law of unintended consequences. You know, should we consider increasing the times of controlled parking zone to protect residential areas? You know, there are certain areas where, because the parking's been introduced into the evening, people are going into the town early, parking in the residential areas and causing problems. However, during the review, as I said earlier, we are looking at all the tariffs and the charging and the evening charging, and that may, you know, we need to fit in perhaps the timings of the controlled parking zone to fit in with the hours of the car park in some respects. I'll take all questions at the end, yeah? That's all right, because I may cover it as you've got time to ask. We need to set a policy for the use of range of payments. To be honest, Rail Council, when we made sure that we could pay by cash, card, an app, whatever way you want to do it. You can phone up and pay over the phone, whatever. So I think we've got that fairly covered. But there are some car parks, they might be very small, that it's uneconomical to actually put a meter in. So they may have to pay by app. And there's certain car parks that might be out on the extreme, right out in the middle of Lansdowne out towards the Shell Ness and that you may have to charge for. And that might be just an app only, because the previous history is when they've had machines there, they've been vandalised and it's not worth it. So there may be other ways, but that's all part of looking at the policy, yeah? And the ways to pay. We need to set out some principles we will follow for enforcement. And sometimes I've had complaints made to me, and sometimes they're justified, and sometimes they're not. But I think we need some sort of clear policy that the public can see on how enforcement is done, where it takes place, because a lot of people say to me, well, it's never done in the rural areas. I've seen them out. I've seen tickets on cars in rural lanes. So I know they go out there, but we need to inform the public a bit more. And where possible, can we consider the linked climate change emergency? But what we're doing is we want to find out from yourselves. So, next steps, the working groups and officers will start to work on drafting a policy. And we'll go out to consultation with the public probably by November, early November, but the public will feed in at events like this by speaking to their ward councillors or businesses may be contacting you, and you can feed in them. Before starting work, the working group would like to hear your views. So that's partly why we're here tonight. You can put all your views through. I'll probably forget them, but Janet will be there writing them down so that they will be at the next meeting and the working group can look at them. And there might be other questions that comes out, but do you think the proposed scope is right? Should we add anything? Or do you think, well, actually, we don't like the idea of that? Tell us if you think anything is missing. So it's now your opportunity, if you don't mind, to feed back in, and are you all right taking the notes there?
So I can see if anybody.
Okay.
Has anybody got questions? Councillor Dendel?
Thank you. Two, one is CPZ, a great idea, I think, but add in commuters. For instance, in Kempsey, there's always been a problem of commuters parking up in the residential area all day. Penalties. And then getting onto the coaches to London.
Yeah.
Or onto Kempsey Holt, the train in, and then the train to London. So think of the commuter areas as well.
Yeah.
I think a lot of issues there. There are several areas. I think.
Yeah. I live in Station Road, Newton.
And it was,
You approve what's here.
and it's funny, it might push a bit onto buses as well. Because it might force them then to use the buses to get to the station. Use it or lose it.
I mean, we're all concerned about whether it's air quality or pollution, particulates and all that. I think the only way you're going to reduce that is to encourage people to use public transport, but partly
Encourage, force them.
there has to be sufficient public transport. And if there isn't sufficient and reliable public transport, people won't use it.
Well, it's a vicious circle because it's use it or lose it. If it's not there, they don't use
But it's
it.
a good point. In what areas where there are problems, I appreciate Kemsley.
Yeah.
And there are other areas where there are problems where commuters go, whether that's bus and whatever. And you're the experts in the ward, because you'll be able to feed that in and say, this is an area, and that might be able to be looked at in the mix as well.
My second one was permits. I mean, I did mention permits
Yeah.
earlier, but I'm interested you haven't mentioned them on the scope.
Well, I think that's controlled parking zone. Maybe I should have said,
Okay.
you talked about the residents parking.
Residence parking.
Yes, that's where it might have, well, depends what the feedback and what the public and the group recommend and what council
I
goes.
mean, I know Simon some years ago had issues with commuters parking up at the top of Park Road.
And
Yeah,
So similar thing.
again, you have to think very carefully about the law of unintended consequences. The minute you put parking restrictions in one area, everyone moves and parks in another area.
Yeah. Enforcement is always a problem. We don't have the resource. We haven't had the resource, to go to all the areas. And I would add schools into that, by the way. Schools are a massive issue of parking issues around schools.
And it is, schools are a problem. If you want, I don't know how many schools live this way, actually, there's quite a lot, but if you have to think at one time, you wouldn't have enough people done them.
Exactly.
And then if you did, where would they park?
Which brings me to my last point, if I may. ANPR.
So again,
ANPR cameras.
in what way?
Well, if you're going to, you said you need the funding to support what you're doing.
Yeah.
And obviously a lot of that funding is going to come from penalties and enforcement.
Yeah.
But you don't have the resources to do the enforcement. Yeah.
Well, I think they do.
So ANPR in a lot of these areas that actually will be able to enforce the penalties without the people going out.
I'm gonna check. I know Martin's on the line.
Yeah.
ANPR, I believe, unless it's in London, or KCC have to approve it.
It has to be approved.
You can't use ANPR as a district council, borough council, and you can't enforce parking by ANPR.
I was in Whitstable.
Off street you can.
Yeah,
Which-
I was in Whitstable a few weeks ago.
Sorry, yeah.
And went through ANPR and had to pay because I went through ANPR.
What,
In a parking gate.
in a car?
In a car park.
Off street.
Yes, that's fine, because they get the payment on the way out.
Yeah.
But not paying can't be enforced by ANPR.
They can't use the
You can have
evidence from
ANPR.
ANPR to force a penalty.
No,
There are
That
no,
makes sense.
no, because you have to pay before you get out of the barrier, doesn't it? though?
yeah, this,
Okay.
with the off-street parking, it's, you are paying to be parked there.
Yeah.
It's not an enforcement-driven facility, it's a payment facility. So the enforcement for the off-street and presumably on the street as well, that's the difference with the car parks that Canterbury, it is, you're paying to park, and the ANPR uses
I
that.
take your point.
ANPR may be something that's worth looking at.
It's something to keep an eye on.
Does Martin have an answer to that?
Evening, everyone. So for those that don't know me, I'm Martin Cassell, Head of Environment and Leisure, so I look after the parking department. I won't add too much more, Richard, Councillor Palmer and Lisa to that. What Richard's referring to, Councillor Dendor, is that if we had our off-street car park and we just had no barrier to it, and somebody drove in, got registered on the ANPR driving into the car park, and then drove out without paying, we are not allowed under the legislation to use the ANPR to chase them for non-payment of parking. So you have to have the barrier system in place in order to do that. And the reason you have the barrier system is to basically be able to get away from the cost of having the enforcement officers walking out and about. So that's why Canterbury and Herne Bay and Whitstable have got that. It allowed them to not have the enforcement officers. But what you then have to have in the background is lots of virtual support to help people when there are issues at the barriers and various other things. And so when we've looked at that, it's a bit of a chicken and egg of whether you save money or not. So Councillor Palmer is right. So if you're a private operator of a car park, you can use ANPR without the barrier, and you can go to the DVLA and say, this car hasn't parked. I'd like their details so that I can send them a penalty charge. Unfortunately, the government have decided that local authorities aren't allowed to do that. And so under our legislation, we don't have the same ability as that private operator.
Thanks, Martin.
Councillor Clark.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. As Mike has just said, residents parking, but I haven't got at the top end of Park Road. I mean, you may remember, I think on the JTB, 18 months, 2 years ago, I brought it to the attention of the JTB with a petition, etc., etc. It went all through the process, and unfortunately, the vast majority of the people who lived in Park Road weren't for it, they weren't against it, they were a bit ambivalent really. But when it came to the final traffic order, it lived in Runard Court, that lived in Lyndhurst Grove, that lived in Bradley Drive, that lived in West Ridge. They were the people that wrote in and scuppered the extension of the parking permits from Valencians Road up to Afton Lane. Now, I realise that's probably a JTB issue, but we can't go through that for another, I think it's another year now, because we were told we couldn't do it in 2 years. But the problem we've got is that it's not only commuters that come and park up at the top end of Park Road in non-residence zone. It's also the people who live in the bottom end of Park Road in the zone who don't want to pay their 45 or 50 quid a year, whatever it is now, for their parking permits. And there's one final, well, a couple of final things. I've said in the past, quite specifically, in fact, in consultation with residents, the actual times that the parking zones are in, resident parking zones are in operation aren't suitable for purpose. They start at 8 o'clock in the morning, they finish at 6 o'clock at night, and then they finish at midday on Saturday, and you park anywhere for free in the zones on a Sunday. I've always, and other residents have said to me that the parking zone should be in operation from 6 a.m. to 12 midnight, 7 days a week. And then they wouldn't mind paying their parking charges. Because a lot of people, you talk to them at the top end of Park Road, they don't want to pay for the parking permits because when they get home at night, they can't park outside there. That's when they get problems parking outside their houses. It's after 6 o'clock when the zone isn't in operation as such. So that's point 2. On point 3, I think Martin will be familiar with this. So I've been talking to Jeff Pitson about it. When there is a new build in a residence parking zone or conversion of a house into flats or a HMO, I think it's under Part K of some regulation. I can't remember what that is. You'll probably be able to tell me, Martin. Those residents in the HMO stroke new flat stroke new build aren't entitled to a residence parking permit within the scheme. However, I've got a HMO not far from me, where after appealing to the chief executive of Swale Borough Council, she overrode Rule K and allowed an appeal, and they've now got parking permits that are there in perpetuity. Now we've either got a policy that says under Part K, HMOs, new builds, flats, etc., don't get parking permits, or they can get parking permits if the chief executive decides they can have them.
Okay, I don't know about the individual case. I don't dispute what you've said.
But
I think part of the problem is not having a parking policy. And I think that could be fed into it to look at that, because there should be a consistent approach that everyone knows where they stand. Whether, you know, and I would have thought a parking, if it's a condition, then it would have been a planning committee.
I can't remember the exact regulation, but it is the Part K of some regulation. I don't know whether it's operated by KCC or by us, Martin.
Let's feed that into the mix, because I think, yeah, what you've said about parking permits and the timing of them, other people have said and suggested. So, and even people on the working group have said the same, have mirrored what you've said.
Can I?
Individual cases like that. Sorry, Chair.
No, I was going to say, just we move on. Mr. Randall had he's got his hand.
Thank you very much. Yeah, could I just ask that in the committee's deliberations that it always considers the value of doing less as well as the value of doing more? Because I'm reminded of, well, let's just say almost a bit of a mis-selling scandal that's happened not far from where I live, where some residents who lived near a school were sold on this idea of having a yellow line on the basis that it would kick out all the school mums picking up their kids from school for however many minutes a day, and the actual result was that the residents themselves were kicked out to make way for the school mums, because they basically put a time limit. I think it's something like 2 in the afternoon to 4 in the afternoon of no parking in this street near a school, which meant anybody who went off to work that day would come back and find themselves ticketed. Whereas the school mums, I say mums, obviously it might be dads as well, could turn up for 10, 15 minutes, whatever, 5 minutes, they weren't worried about it because they weren't even going to be there long enough to get a ticket. It wasn't really a problem to them. But anybody who had a car or had a car that they had on the street, or had to be out at work, they were hit. So we had this bizarre situation where something was missold that actually created a problem that didn't exist. And people were told it was going to help them, and actually it hurt them. So yeah, I'd just like to say, always consider whether doing less might also be a good solution. Thank you.
I think you're right. That would be a joint transport decision. And sometimes I don't think they look at the law of unintended consequences of what they do.
Thank you.
Councillor Winters.
Thank you. I know Richard does know my views on this one, but for the purpose of this meeting, I've got my Milton Regis ward hat on, as very often I do. I'm there to represent my residents along with Councillor Bowles. I would, as I said before, would be greatly opposed to putting a car parking charge on the Milton Country Park, which at the present time is free. I know there has been talks in the past that there was talk about putting a charge on there. As far as I'm concerned, it's totally undo the issues I had as a councillor and the previous ward councillor with the parking issues in the surrounding roads. So I would be greatly opposed to that. And I think the other thing is, logically, put a parking machine in Milton Country Park with the issues we had with vandalism, it wouldn't last 5 minutes. So that's, for the purpose of this meeting, that's fine.
And you're not the only one who's thrown it into the mix. I'm not here to make decisions tonight, and it would be wrong, but yeah. But sometimes the law of one income, you put parking machine in, or you put an app in and say pay by Ringo. No one does it because they block up the side roads. So you've got to think about the consequences of an action, and that's what we should be doing with the policy. Thank you.
I'd like to take up the point about parking permits. There are lots of parts of Sittingbourne, particularly in the centre, where there's only just room to get one car outside your house. I wonder how they managed to fit in. Remarkably, they seem to. For those people to have to pay to park outside their house, I think is wrong. I don't see why they should have a permit, not have to pay for it, or a very, very notional charge, because it's the only place they've got to park their one vehicle. Secondly, just taking up the point about schools, there are a couple of schools near me. It's inconvenient for an hour or two, but we all went to school once. Some of us got collected, some of us had to walk home. It would help if more people walked to school or cycled to school. It would help if the mums and dads collecting them didn't arrive early, like we were blaming the coaches for doing, and so the jam lasts for longer. But we've got to accept that at the moment, many people will need to park near the school to collect up their kids. And one of the things you have to accept if you live near a school. And as far as I think it was a shame that the parking times in the council-run car parks in the evening after 6:30 were raised, or that period was raised, extended. And I hope you look very seriously at reconsidering that decision. One last point, at the very start of one of your first things to consider was the need to compare with other authorities in Kent. I don't see why that's actually important. We're not going to have people who live on the borders with Medway, Blamon, hurrying into a mile down the road to park in Swale because it's cheaper, or vice versa. And certainly don't think we should go for the highest
possible charging things. And the more we get to the lowest charge, the better.
Yeah, I think there will be a review of the evening time, and that's probably the main thing. Again, there has been several things into the mix. Some people said, why don't you just have a fixed fee of £1 or £2 per night? Parking outside schools, it's probably every councillor will have complaints about it. I mean, I have a view of parking outside the schools. It probably is a bit controversial, but I actually think when there's congestion outside of the school, makes it safer because it slows the traffic down. People don't like losing windows, and I know because I was in the ambulance service. And when you go out to a school and someone's been hit 30 miles an hour, they have life-changing injuries. If they're hit at 20 miles an hour, probably 95% of them will get up and walk away. All right. So sometimes congested traffic, because no one wants to lose a window, so they slow right down. But then child runs out and they get hit. That child survives. They often stand up, run away. You get
Councillor Miller.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, especially for town centre, developers who put in plans forward for X amount of properties and providing nowhere near enough car parking spaces, which leads to a knock-on effect for residents who are paying for a permit.
Yep.
I've been contacted, but not just recent, but other examples. And I just think we need to be careful
this is a parking policy review. I would say planning or planning committee, if they look at the application and they feel that the parking isn't sufficient, even if it follows our own parking standards, that could be a reason for refusal. But I can't say how a planning committee should deal with planning applications.
The KCC won't support us because they don't see a problem with the parking issues.
Can I just ask Councillor Dendor?
Thank you. Thank you, Simon, for that one. Yes, a couple of things. I totally support Tony on the Milton Country Park issue. As chair, you would expect me to. But it brings up a bigger question. When I do through the JTV, you might know also KCC, asked to put one of the yellows, single yellows there. The first question I ask myself every single time is, where are they going to go? In other words, displacement. And the Milton Keynes Country Park is a good example. So if they're not going to park in there, or won't park in there because of paying, then they will park on the streets. If you put a double yellow down at the end of Atley Way, they'll park further up Atley Way, and so on and so forth.
That's when the councillors make a decision.
Yeah.
Whether it's at JTB, whether it's at planning, or when it's at the policy parking review, we have to think about what the knock-on effects are.
Yeah, which brings me back to Gareth's unintended consequences, and that's what you have to take into account. Sorry.
Can I just move on? Councillor Hall.
Yeah, I was going to say, what about you were talking about the congestion's a good idea. What about the cars that sit there idling around and so on, talk to people come out?
From an injury point of view, it slows the traffic down. You move traffic outside of the school and you have just saying there's a different way of looking at things. I would prefer to see that more people walk to school and or use a healthier way.
I would like to see that.
I'm amazed at the number of people who I know who 5 minutes later drive back home. Probably harder getting into your car, driving it and starting it. Then I can't work it out. And whereas, you know, I'd walk down and some people do. But yeah, you're right. There are, and again, so is pollution more of a problem?
Yeah.
That's
Good. We've had quite a wide discussion on this tonight. I'm going to take the last question, Councillor.
Thank you, Councillor Watson, Roman Moore. I can't believe that we haven't got a parking policy. It's a bit of a stunner for me. So this has definitely got a big way forward. All of the roads that we believe that should have parking permits. So I appreciate the fact you're going to put it out to consultation. I would hope that it's going to be a wide consultation, not just with residents. I think we should be getting the schools involved. We should be getting the fire station involved, the police, that everyone, that all shareholders, because parking is such an issue and it causes so much disruption and argument and everything that goes on with it. When people get so animated about parking, I know that myself and where I live, and I live near a school. So yeah, I'm looking forward to what you're going to come up with, because I think this is definitely going to be a way that we can push forward. I would also echo what Paul said at the end there. When we're looking at comparing to other authorities on parking, let's not compare it unfavourably for our residents. Our parking, our level is at a pretty good level compared with, I go down to Whitstable and I have to take out almost a mortgage payment in a few hours in Whitstable. It's worth it because it's Whitstable, but we need to strike a balance. So, but thank you. I look forward to the consultation.
And I agree with that. And I know the fire brigade sometimes will contact the local authority and say, we have a problem at this particular junction on this road, and they feed in, and sometimes it leads to the junction having yellow lines or something like that.
Thank you, councillor Tom.
Discussion. I know you've got questions, you're more than welcome to email yourself and Janet. And that's all right. Don't get
Councillor, thank you for your time.
all right.
Yes.
Don't mind.
Yeah.
I'm going to shoot off because
Okay, that's fine.
I've not long been home. It doesn't want to park in time. I've got to
Let's move on. Agenda item 8, corporate plan. Councillor Gibson.
Thank you, Chair. I really appreciate the graveyard shift. But to be fair, it's been a really interesting meeting, and
Yes.
certainly enjoyed it thus far. And let's hope this won't dampen the enthusiasm. So you probably recall at the June area meetings, we had some round robins, broke up into groups, and we were asking people that were there to come up with their priorities for their wards to inform the corporate plan that we're just about to embark upon. Subsequently, service committee chairs and vice chairs had a facilitated workshop prior to meeting with officers to discuss the kind of aspirations, visions and ambitions for the future, certainly until 2027. Out of that, we have an agreement for 5 key areas in terms of priorities. The first one being the communities. I'll have to use this as a crib sheet because we'll have to top of my head, but to enable our residents to live, work and enjoy their leisure time safely in our borough. The alternative to that one was supporting and enabling our communities. And what we're looking for is feedback as to where we think that sits. Is that a comfortable catch-all for that particular area? Or is it something else we should add or remove? So that's the community is to enable our residents to live, work and enjoy the leisure time safely in our borough, or alternatively just simply supporting and enabling our communities. I'll take you, so you check through
I'm going to say, should we go through the list and then we'll ask questions afterwards?
Yeah, kind of. It's probably just well, I think just to have gone through, but that's okay. So I'll do exactly as you
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind.
Right, okay. So the next one was the economy, and that was to support a thriving economy, or to support the economy that helps businesses in a sustainable way. There was another option there that came up with, which was working with our businesses and charitable organisations to improve the economy. Environment, to prepare our borough for challenges ahead. Again, alternatively, to provide a cleaner, healthier and more enjoyable environment. The health and housing, everyone to have access to a decent home and improve health and well-being. And finally, the running of the council, which was concurrent with all of those, to engage with communities and outside bodies to deliver our priorities in an open and efficient way, working within our resources. And that we kind of come to an agreement there that was probably the best option. So there's no second option there. The options are on page 5. you want to have a look at those, just to remind yourselves what they are. Thank you, Chair.
Has anybody got any questions regarding, if we go through each of the headings so that Councillor Gibson can take away anything from the meeting? Is anything, have you got any comments on community? Councillor Dendall.
Obviously not in Swell Borough at the moment. I'll have my say. I think the first bit, rather than just supporting enabling, I think is excellent. The first section, enable our residents to live, work, and enjoy leisure and safely in the borough. I think it covers it all. On economy, I think the last one is the one I would go with. But maybe that's working with our businesses and charitable organisations to improve the. But I might add the word in local economy.
So, yeah, Jack's just important. Yeah.
On environment, I think the second, to provide a cleaner, healthy, more enjoyable environment, I think is that's me. Thanks.
Anybody else? Yeah.
I wonder if in some it might be better to use both because they are slightly different. I know you want to keep it short, but I wonder if that might be the case in the first one.
Right.
They're not mutually exclusive. Together they probably make a stronger statement. In the one on the environment, I don't think it's strong enough in what in realising the challenges we are facing, the environmental challenges, and that needs to be amplified. How we're going to respond to the climate changes and what the effect on our environment. That's not enough. I'd like to see that emphasised and underlined.
Just to say that this has been to Western Area Committee and they also quite like the idea of combining some of them. So yes, you know, that very much that can happen.
Any more comments? Okay, at that point, we'll move on.
So much for the council plan, wasn't
Agenda item 8, public forum. I understand that is Daniel Thomas online.
Hello, yes, is my microphone working? Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Excellent, thank you very much. I've got a couple of things I'd like to ask if I could, please. The first one is there was a general waste bin on a green area between Pond Drive and Peregrine Drive, which has recently been removed. It was quite heavily used and there is a dog waste bin there as well next to it. The bin has gone and the dog waste bin is now taking all of the rubbish and it's massively overflowing. It doesn't seem to be being emptied often enough. Is there anything that's going to happen with replacing the bin there, or will the dog waste bin be collected more frequently?
Well, we have an answer to that.
Okay, Mr. Thomas, so you did send this question in advance, which gave us the opportunity to check with officers. And the environmental contracts manager has said that the team didn't remove the bin. So they're unsure how that happened. But what they plan to do is replace the dog bin, which is still in place, with a larger multi-use bin, which will accept dog waste and general litter. And they'll monitor the emptying of the bin. I hope that will help to resolve the issue.
Yep, excellent, thank you, because the one that's there at the moment is definitely overflowing and it's not very pleasant at the moment at all.
Okay, thank you.
Second one, if I could, regarding a installation of a footpath along the top of Highstead Road. I know that this came round through KCC a while ago, but nothing has really happened. I just wonder if there's an update on what the plan is for this.
Okay, so again, as you submitted this in advance, I checked with Kent County Council and they advised that a detailed scheme proposal was taken to Swale JTB on the 7th of September 2020, proposing to make part of Highstead Road one way to allow for the installation of a footway, but this wasn't approved at the JTB meeting, who instead asked for KCC and Swell Borough Council to investigate acquiring land from the school. However, to date, no further work has been done on this. But we can inquire, make some more inquiries, and if I find out anything further, I can feed that back to you and to the committee.
Brilliant, thank you. I mean, I know that I did hear about trying to acquire the land from the school. There are adjacent to the other side of the road, some land that I believe probably belongs to the houses at the back onto there, but the perimeter fences are actually set back quite a bit from there. And there probably is some land that could be acquired to build a path on there. I mean, I think it is probably quite a pressing issue, really. I mean, we go that way to take our children to school. Quite often there are many children in the road there. People do not slow down along there. I feel it's probably only a matter of time before there's a serious accident along that stretch of road.
Okay, thank you. I'll feed that back to Kent County Council.
Councillor Gibson was going to add to that.
Yes, Mr. Thomas, Councillor Tim Gibson, one thing I would say to you is that there's a development recently been given permission along Swan Street, and part of the Section 106 agreements for that will likely include a footpath down that route. But I'll confirm that, and I'll make sure that we either through Janet or myself get back to you.
Excellent, thank you. That was another point I was going to make, that there's going to be even more houses there and even more foot traffic coming down that way. But if a path is part of that plan, then that's very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. Councillor Wise, ask a question.
No, we won't.
No.
Sure.
Okay.
Any other public?
Any other public questions or consultations? Questions, right? Two matters arising. Yeah, do you go through the list of the current matters arising?
Okay, so on page 13, there's the progress on matters arising. These are issues that have been raised at previous area committee meetings and set out the updates on actions or progress. I'll go through them one at a time. So the first one, Sittingbourne Tennis Club, that there's an update there just saying that the works were scheduled to be between 8 and 10, last between 8 and 10 weeks. Signage has been installed and a new online booking system at Milton is being designed. King George's already has online bookings available. Works have progressed well in the first week with no issues to note. Number 2, sports facilities in the area. The building facilities strategy is scheduled to go to the October Community Committee, so we'll be able to feed back further on that at the next meeting. Pond safety in Swale, divisional member Mike Dendor kindly raised this with the Kent Fire and Rescue Service, Director of Response and Resilience, who advised that they do already go into some schools about pond safety and inland water safety, but they're currently reviewing their educational programme, and they will look at expanding and improving the programme in the future. And I believe they've said they'll feed back to you.
Yeah, there was a briefing to county members on the end of this month, 26th.
Okay.
Which is a risk management briefing and has got a detailed consideration of danger of water, lakes, rivers, water. So it is progressive.
Okay.
Did somebody, I see your hand up.
Yeah, just a quick point. Myself and Councillor Bowers were advised on Monday morning, basically, about the floodlights, the new lights that have been put in at Milton Regis Rec. The complainer, must have a complaint somewhere or other, and they were burning at 1 o'clock in the morning. I know I did email Graham and Martin, and Graham didn't come back and say this was going to be looked into in the joint email that we both had. So can I ask the question, has this been sorted yet?
I'll feed that back. I'll check and come back to you.
Because those lights, I do live quite near them myself, those lights, I want to 1 to 2 o'clock in the morning, I think it's cancer bars. They are very bright, yeah.
Sorry, James, I think.
Sorry, there's
They
Today.
went, last night.
Jolly good, thank you. Cheers.
Sorry, James, I should have said that was a fire authority.
Okay. Coombe Drive, that's now had a satisfactory outcome. So the public space protection order to gate the alleyway has now been implemented and the gates installed. Heritage issues, so there are updates in the paper on
To the Coombe Drive.
yes.
There was gates installed, but in further vandalism. The purchase of Tina as the contractor to visit the site again. And they're going to add further devices to them, so that the height that is going to be risen for another group. It's going to make sure a lot of things done to stop the vandalism. But
Okay.
it's still not
out. Okay, I was a bit
Thank you for that.
hasty to say that it was resolved. Okay. Heritage issues, an update is in the paper on Sittingbourne Conservation Area Review and Milton Regis Conservation Area Review. I don't know if anybody's got any comments on those. So the first one is complete, that Sittingbourne Conservation Area Review, Milton Regis, should be complete by the end of this year or beginning of next year. Periwinkle Watermill site, there's a update which is on Appendix 1 of this document. If anybody's got any comments on that, on page 17. I won't go through it all as it's quite lengthy, and you should all have it in front of you.
I've read it once, but it's very disappointing, I have to say, that nothing's been done, but I have to need to agree that it's such a disappointment that that site has been left as it is.
Swell local heritage list. The invitation for nominations was extended by another 3 weeks and concluded on the 17th of July. And officers are now collating all the nominations received. There'll be a selection panel set up in autumn to assess those considered worthy of the local heritage list. Swell Public Transport Group. In the last meeting, Mr. Davidson, you asked if the Swell Public Transport Group that was in existence a few years ago could be reinstated. We checked with the Director of Regeneration and Neighbourhoods, and unfortunately there's not the resource to do that. However, as the Chair mentioned earlier, there is the possibility of a different forum being set up, which may go partway.
I spoke to Richard Transformer, and he said there's a big meeting on the 18th. Going to contact me about once we start one on the 9th. We want to meet with me initially, and then see if we can do it. It'll be basically certain people going on to feed ideas into the council. So there'll be a combination of the board sort of users, transport users, and a couple of interested councillors. Then you could feed it into the council, the rest of the councillors.
Okay, thank you. And then the last one on page 16, antisocial behaviour. There were some issues raised at the last meeting and they were looked into and the responses fed back to those members. And also just to confirm that a representative from the police will be attending the December meeting to talk about policing in the Sittingbourne area. So that's that item. If anybody got any questions on?
Yeah, on that final point about meeting with the police, I just encourage all of the councillors to do their utmost to advertise that to residents. I know that will be something that they will all be paying close attention to. We've got ongoing issues with the town centre, and I'm grateful that many councillors for the Sittingbourne Area Committee signed the open letter that went to the Police and Crime Commissioner. They are, in effect, and regrettably the police, burying their head in the sand about the issues that we have with the High Street in particular, and we desperately need them to take more proactive action. So, yeah, I welcome that we've got that opportunity, so thanks for that, Chair. But I would just encourage everybody to do their utmost to make sure that gets out to their residents.
Thank you. Item 10. Item 10, local issues to be raised. Is that anybody got anything that they wish to raise that should go to other committees? Councillor Denville.
Yes, just basically one that I'm working with KCC and Jackson Civils at the moment. As you know, the Go-First Junction is being improved. And there are many concerns for residents in that area. Not about doing the improvements, but what's going to happen whilst the improvements are being done. So I'm working with them to find out if it minimise the disruption and find out what kind of disruption there will be. I thought I'd bring it up in case anybody wants to ask anything about it.
Anything they want?
Particularly relevant, of course, to Ashley and Kemsley, Cohurst Road and that area, and Iwaders, of course, as well. Yes.
No, it's fine.
You're welcome. Is there anybody else? Yes. So at that point, as we have no agenda items for 11 or 12, I call the meeting closed.
Very good meeting, too.
I was getting a bit too long.